Hey, welcome into another weekly Q&A episode here on Dealing the Cards. This week, I'm going to talk about Victor Scott and whether or not he should be seen as the everyday center fielder. Who are the most likely Cardinals to be traded this offseason? Would they actually ever make Helsley a starter? What does Michael Girsch do? I'll even react to the Ohtani game for Andrew. All that and more on this episode of Dealing the Cards. Hey, if you're joining us for the first time or you've been watching for a while and aren't subscribed already, please do right now. Hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel out a ton. And like the channel, like this episode as well. We've been loving the support on the Q&A episode. So if this is something you enjoy, like, subscribe, and then comment down below questions you have so that we can keep these going. We want to be able to address things that we don't talk about in the podcast or expand further. And so Andrew does a good job each week of trying to pick out different questions and different topics. And so definitely let us know if you have stuff you want us to address. And yeah, we'll do that. So today I'm going to start a little bit with I think it's a really fair question. And basically the premise of it was why is it predetermined that Victor Scott the second is the future center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals? And I think in some ways it is, but in most ways it isn't, right? Like I think when you look at the organization right now, especially out of guys that are like able to potentially play in 2025, right? Because like I'll take JJ Weatherholt, for example. Like he's probably the future second baseman or third baseman, but he's not going to be up next year. So no one's talking about that really. And it's just too soon to talk about that. So there might be other center fielders in the system that can arise in the near future that could overtake a Victor Scott. But when you look at their immediate options, it's basically Victor Scott or Michael Ciani. Again, you could go out, and I wouldn't be surprised, I wouldn't be shocked if the Cardinals go out this offseason and acquire a center fielder via trade or free agent acquisition if that's where they feel like they can upgrade the offense the best and maintain defense there. They could do Lars Nootbaar in center, but they always seem pretty hesitant to do that. I think they like him in the corners. So again, it does come down to Victor Scott versus Michael Ciani then. And again, Victor Scott hasn't proven really anything yet at the major league level, at least enough to be like cemented as the long-term option, right? So yes, he's the presumptive future center fielder for the St. Louis Cardinals, but I don't think it's written in stone, and I don't think the Cardinals are like, there's no shot in 2027 someone else isn't going to be starting in center field for us. Frankly, Victor Scott might not start there in 2025. I really do think he's going to get a shot in spring training to win the job, more so than this year, where this year was kind of like he made the roster mostly because there were a lot of injuries and he performed well at the beginning of camp, less so because they wanted that to happen or were anticipating that to happen. I think it's kind of more like Mason Wynn coming into camp this year, where maybe not quite as Mason Wynn. Mason was pretty much penciled in as the starting shortstop. There wasn't really anything that was going to happen that wouldn't at least start the year there. I think it will be a legit competition between Ciani or Scott. But if it's close, it should be Victor Scott, right? Like he's got the higher offensive upside. Again, the base stealing threat. Like we haven't really seen it at the major league level yet, which is pretty frustrating, but we just know how dynamic he is too. And again, Michael Ciani is competing for a gold glove in center field right now. So I think Victor Scott can get to that level, but he's clearly not there yet. But he's got the tools and he's got the speed to be able to do something like that. So I think altogether, he's the guy you want to see become the center fielder because you know if you could put all the tools together, he's got what it takes. Michael Ciani has the lower ceiling, and he also has a lower floor than I think people give it credit for. Like, he had a really productive stretch from like, what was it, June till he got hurt. But productive for him was still like 20% below league average. I think it was around that time. But anyways, he's I think it was Kareem recently was talking about how Michael Ciani, out of players who've had over 200 plate appearances who played for the Cardinals since like 2000 or 2010, has the lowest OPS of any player who's played. So obviously his defense helps carry him a little bit. But like if he's gonna hit like that, like you want him more as a fourth outfielder than you do your everyday center fielder, especially with the state of the offense right now, right? Like it'd be different if we're talking about the Cardinals offense that we thought it was going to be coming to here. There was a top 10 unit, and then Michael Ciani bats ninth, but that's not what we're talking about here. So you kind of need to maximize offensive positions. You need the defense too, but that's where Victor Scott comes in, where it's like, can you give you more offense and most of that defense? You're not talking about a significant enough drop there. It's not like going from Nootbaar to Jordan Walker or like Tyler O'Neill to Jordan Walker or whatever. It's like, no, you're talking about an elite defensive center fielder to a very good one. And obviously elite's really helpful, but you need some bats in this lineup. So I think that's where the kind of the talk with Victor Scott comes in. The next question I think is really interesting and gets broken into a lot of categories in my opinion, but And I feel a feeling this question is going to be asked a lot more, but we're for sure going to be talking about this on the podcast over the coming weeks and months, and then especially as reporting comes out, because I would feel like in the next few weeks, if not the next month, we're going to start getting some tidbits from the Derek Goulds, the Katie Woos, the Jeff Jones, the whoever, the Brandon Schaefers, that these are the people that may be available in trades. But the question was, who are the players you view as most likely to be traded this offseason from the Cardinals? Okay, so let's start with the veterans because that's the low-hanging fruit one. But some of this depends what direction the Cardinals go, right? Like if they're more of a retool rebuild, they could offload these arms because they don't need them and they're trying to save money, but they also could just like keep the arms like Michaelis and Mats because like they don't have to move them, not trying to necessarily get better. But I do think Michaelis and Mats are likely or are the most likely probably starters on the roster to be traded. Obviously, they're not trading Gray. I do think there's a world they could trade Eric Fetty. And because that's like a nice contract at that price, especially if they ended up just keeping Michaelis or Mats. Like Fetty's better than both of them, but they could say, hey, if we're going to give McGreevy and Palante and Matthews and whoever else chances, then maybe we capitalize on the trade value of an Eric Fetty. Because again, like the Cardinals kind of fleeced the White Sox in the Dodgers in that move. And the Cardinals gave up a Tommy Edman to get Eric Fetty. So like you're not going to get the exact same return back, but could you get some decent prospects? Again, not like top 100 guys, but could you strengthen the system a little bit more? Or could you get a reliever or another young bat? Like, I don't know. There's something they could potentially do with Fetty there that I think is interesting, because if a team is looking for a stopgap starter, Fetty at $7.5 million is a much better deal than Kyle Gibson at $13 million or something. So that's just something to look out for. But I think Michaelis and Mats are probably the two most likely. They're gonna have to eat money on it. But I do think there's a market for both because it's a 1-year deal. Like, let's say, okay, so Michaelis, for give or take, makes about $18 million next year. If the Cardinals eat half of that and he only makes $9 million, like $9 million for a starting pitcher in free agency is like pretty much the bare minimum you have to give someone like Michaelis, even for how bad he's been this year. And again, you're not going to get anything in return too, but for the Cardinals to shave $9 million off the books could be meaningful. So, and even if they eat a little more, even if they shave just $6 million off the books, would much rather do that than run him out there again. And then Matt's, again, it's $12 million, so shave like $4 million off the deal. Again, you save another $8 million there. Like, let's say they save $8 million on both Michaelis and Matt's. That's $16 million that they either saved for their own books, for, well, their own pocketbooks, which isn't going to make anyone happy, or to infrastructure investments or for payroll flexibility. Makes sense. On the position player side, this is where things get really interesting. Clearly, I don't think people are talking about it enough. I know some of you are, but I don't think in general people are talking about it enough. But I think Ivan Herrera is like as good as gone this offseason. Now, I'm not like advocating for that. I really like Ivan Herrera, and I think it makes a lot of sense for him to be with the organization long term, right? Because Wilson Contreras isn't getting any younger. He's probably going to start catching less and less. I think Ivan Herrera has a high ceiling, so you would think they'd want him as the backup catcher, but they don't. They want Pedro Paez. It's just how it is. Ivan Herrera's out of player options next year, roster options. So, like, if they bring him into camp, they either have to carry 3 catchers going into the year, or they have to option Paez or DFA Ivan Herrera. And I don't see that. That makes no sense. So I think he's probably one of the guys they dangle out there to get controllable starting pitching or to get a bat that fits a different way in the roster, right? Like, again, I don't actually think this is going to happen, but like they could maybe go big and like dangle Ivan and multiple other valuable pieces to go after a Luis Robert to play center field and maximize the offense. Like, that could make sense. And Robert, for what it's worth, like is on a pretty team friendly extension for what he is. So you're not talking about going out and acquiring a $35 million player. So that's something like in the White Sox of all teams, like maybe they want a package of an Ivan Herrera, Nolan Gorman, guys like that. Something could be interesting. Or Ivan Herrera for maybe another center fielder. It's like not as valuable, obviously, or a different fitting bat, or again, a young starter, something like that, or a prospect package. I definitely think Ivan Herrera is tradable and going to be traded at this point. A Nolan Gorman, I do think, is probably toward the top of the list of guys. I don't think they're like, it's not like Dylan Carlson and Tyler O'Neill where they're like, hey, we have to trade this guy. But because his value hasn't plummeted like that yet. Okay. Nolan Gorman still has value in this league, And not just, again, when people are like, Ohtani has some value, Dylan Carlson has some value. No, they didn't. Everyone knew they're going to trade him. No value. Nolan Gorman's a guy where it's like the Cardinals could be inclined to trade, and he maybe be the one of the guys they'd be more likely to trade to make something bigger happen, or to like reshuffle the deck, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go all in on a huge blockbuster, but they might be like, hey, the Gorman thing isn't working out, so can we get someone of that caliber to in a different position, or even if it's like another second baseman type, it's just like, hey, we just want a different mix of guys. I think Gorman's on the block potentially again, but I don't think they're like forcing a trade, but I could see him being traded. He's probably more likely. And then a sneaky one for me is Alec Burleson. I'm not advocating for it, so don't hear it as like, oh, Josh is saying the Cardinals should trade Alec Burleson. I don't think it's wrong to consider it though, right? He just had a career year. Again, the second half hasn't looked as good though, so that's something to be concerned about. But think about all of like the corner, outfield, first basemen they have, and again, left-handed bats. They have a lot of those too. And so the way they could look at it is Alec Burleson may carry more value in a deal at this point than a Nolan Gorman. I don't know about Lars Nootbaar. I think he's still the more valuable potentially, but maybe it's like, hey, we flip Gorman or we flip Burleson because he gets us more in return. And with the new hitting coaches and hopefully a new front office too, they're hopeful that they can get guys like Nootbaar. Well, Nootbaar just needs to be healthier. He's been good. He's had his rough stretches this year, but he's been pretty good when he's healthy. I think while we're here, I'll check his WRC plus now, but like Donovan's back up to 111, and then he went 4 for 4 today, or he was 4 for 4 when I started recording this, so I don't exactly know what his is right now. But he's kind of bounced back some after having like a rough late summer. Nootbaar is down to a 107 WRC plus, it looks like. So it's started to be a little rough again. But the thing with Nootbaar is when he's healthy, he tends to be really good. And so and not really good as like a superstar, but like a very productive bat. So I don't want to trade him necessarily, especially if his value's lower. Again, you make the same argument for Gorman, but maybe that's why they would move in Alec Burleson instead. Don't see them trading Brendan Donovan. Obviously not Mason Wynn. No way. Or I don't see them trading Jordan Walker. I could potentially see a Nolan Arenado trade. It seems hard to pull off, though. It seems unlikely. If they really went rebuild, then maybe Wilson Contreras or Sonny Gray, but I also don't think they're going to go that hard of a rebuild. But it makes sense to consider if you're like, hey, our window's 2027, then why do you have Wilson Contreras right now? Like, I would rather have Ivan Herrera playing and developing. Again, I like Wilson Contreras. I love Wilson Contreras. He's a great player, but if he's not going to be the same player in 2027, why not maximize the trade value and move the money right now? Again, Arenado, not the same player anymore, but do you try to move the money if you can? Stuff like that all has to be considered. But yeah, I don't necessarily think a Gorman or an Arenado or a Contreras trade are all that likely. And then there's some ancillary names like Luke and Baker, Michael Ciani maybe. Don't really see them trade Victor Scott, but you never know. And then maybe some prospects here or there, especially like the 40-man guys like a Drew Rom you probably DFA him, but maybe a Robersa, Graceffo, like maybe those are some names, or they want to make some 40-man roster spots, and those are some names could be on the move. But major league roster wise, pitching. Oh, and then Ryan Helsley. I knew I was missing someone. Ryan Helsley. I'd say if I had to pick the most likely Cardinals to be traded this offseason, the top three for me would be Ivan Herrera, Ryan Helsley. Man, I'll say top four. Ryan Helsley, Ivan Herrera, and Ivan Herrera number one by far. One of Michaelis or Matz, and then like Nolan Gorman are kind of like my top four most likely. It doesn't mean all of them will get traded, but like what I could see happening. And then Matz is up there. Burleson's up there. But we'll see what they do, right? But yeah, Helsley could definitely be traded because of, if they're not going to extend him, if they're not going to make him to a starter, which I'll talk about in a minute, it probably makes sense to deal him no matter, even if they're trying to contend next year, because it's just probably like closer is more of a luxury and like an take you over the top piece of a team rather than like a building block. So if you're not going to extend him, you should probably try and get a haul for him this offseason and trade him. But you could disagree on that. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below on that. But before we keep going, I'd like to thank one of the sponsors of our podcast, and it's 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles. Many of you already checked them out for sports cards and Pokemon cards, so please let them know if you checked them out, and let them know we sent you. But they're located at 9640 Olive Boulevard, Olivet. They're open 10 to 5 Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturdays. Again, they buy, sell, and trade all sports cards, so all sports cards and Pokemon cards. news collections of packs, boxes, and single cards of local players and historic stars from all around the league. So yeah, go check them out. They have a really active Instagram page, so it's a great place to check out when they have deals going on, when they have brand new cards in. They highlight some of their special cards that they have, and just really cool to see some really iconic. Like they had a Patrick Mahomes rookie card in there recently that looked really cool. Andrew's done some pack openings on here and pulled some different cards. So definitely go check out 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles and let them know we sent you. And again, SeatGeek, you use our code NEWT over at SeatGeek to save $20 off your first purchase of $50 or more. So whether it's one of the last Cardinal games of the season, whether it's an NFL game, college football, hockey, St. Louis Blues season starting soon, concerts, you can use our code NEWT to go to a game and save $20 off when it's your first purchase of $50 or more. So let's continue on. We'll get into Helsley talk again. So the question was, has Helsley ever said he would like to try starting again? If he doesn't push it, I don't see it happening. Publicly, I have not seen anything. I believe it was Brendan Schaefer who said one time that he kind of asked him, or kind of, he didn't necessarily ask him if he wants to start again, but he asked him about the idea of Jordan Hicks starting again. It was like, that's really good for him, but he didn't necessarily use it as like a launching pad to make his own case to start. And again, like if Ryan Helsley's so adamant, like if he's like, I do not want to start, then you don't mess with that, right? But I think it's probably in his best interest to become a starting pitcher. And you might be like, why is that? Again, okay, injury risk is always there. Okay, that's totally fair. But that's also there as a reliever. And it depends on who you talk to, but there's people within the industry who would say that they believe that if you're on a consistent 5-day rotation and you pitch every 5th day rather than maybe 2 days in a row and you don't pitch for a week and then a 1 day max effort, then 10 days without pitching and 3 out of 5 days, and like that's harder on your arm than if you're pitching every 5th day. Also, do you see the kind of contracts that starting pitchers get versus relievers? Now, I know Ryan Helsley is one of the best relievers in baseball. He's probably not looking at Edwin Diaz, Josh Hader deal, but he's probably not far off that, and that's really good money. And so he's already going to get something significant. But like if he shows out as a starting pitcher, that ups your value in free agency. And so other teams are going to probably pay more for, well, not probably. If Ryan Helsley's an ace, you pay more for that. If he's a number 2, you pay more for that. If he's number 3, that's probably, and especially a dynamic 3 that could become more than that, it's probably about the same class of what he was getting as a reliever. And then they can also bake in like the Jordan Hicks deal with the Giants. It's like, hey, we're going to pay this guy a good amount of money, but if he doesn't work out as a starter, we know he can pitch as a reliever. And so teams would always have that in their back pocket. And again, injury risk is a thing. That's true. But also, like, it just it's that way in a bullpen too. And then also, if it doesn't work out as a starting pitcher next year, it's not that hard to move him back to the bullpen and for him to reclaim his dominance. I mean, Jordan Hicks just did. Jordan Hicks has been great since he went back to the bullpen. I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of a curve to come back, but I would love to hear people continue to tell me what the downsides are. I just haven't heard enough of a downside yet to not do it, other than injury or people saying like that's a dumb idea. But like, I'm not really being given a lot of reason why it doesn't work. I've heard people push back and say like, oh, it didn't work with Jordan Hicks. And it's like, okay, true. Like Jordan Hicks did get moved back to the bullpen. And so like that didn't work, but there's so many names in the league right now that it did work with. You have Ronaldo Lopez, Seth Lugo, Blanco, Sanchez from the Phillies. I have a whole list on one of my recent stories on Redbird Rants right now. Plante this year went back to the AAA and then came back up as a reliever. Like it's something that's happening around the league right now, where relievers are being turned into starters and it's working out. Garrett Crochet, and there's a few that it really didn't work out with, but they've usually just kind of went back to me to bullpen arm and it hasn't been a problem. But a lot of the guys have actually become better. And so, especially if you have Chaim Bloom take over and a different coaching staff and different instructors, like I might trust that to work out well. So I like to see it happen. I guess I understand why the people don't want to see it, but and there's people smarter than me who want to see it happen too. So I'm not just like randomly throwing it out there. It's like, hey, why has no one thought of this? It's like, no, there's other people that know baseball better than you and I probably, and who are like, yeah, Ryan Helsley should be a starter. Also, he came up as a starter. He wasn't like, oh, he wasn't good enough to be a starter, so we threw him in the bullpen. It was like, hey, the Cardinals need a bullpen arm, so they called him up to put him in the bullpen. They pigeonholed him in a bullpen role, like they did with Jordan Hicks. Again, Jordan Hicks tried to be a starter this year. It didn't work. You can argue he got to start at the major league level before, but He was told a week before the season started, and he wasn't stretched out to be starter. He didn't prepare the whole offseason to be starter because they told him he was a bullpen arm. It's not giving someone a real chance. So, anyways, I'd love to see Ryan Helsley start. I think he'd be dynamic. And again, worst case, I mean, obviously injuries always baked in, but that's pitching across the board. I mean, don't tell me that Ryan Helsley throwing 103 miles an hour and throwing tons of wicked sliders and pitching like on a weird schedule isn't less risky than him starting. So, anyways, that's my 2 cents with that. Next question though we have is, I think their TV spending or their spending will be tentative until they figure out and have some clarity on their TV deal. Thoughts? Yeah, that's true, but I think it's also, well, I'll be interested to see TV stuff around the league in general and how many teams kind of use it. Like, I mean, even I think that as Cardinal fans, and when you're following the Cardinals, like you're gonna highlight things with them because you're most invested in watching their things. But like, it affected other clubs this offseason too. Like the Rangers are a notable one. Again, I don't know how much it affected the Padres, but the Padres scaled back their payroll a lot. Again, they had an owner pass away, and they're probably overspending what they could anyways at that moment. But it's probably going to be a baseball-wide issue, not just the Cardinals. But I think, yes, they will probably take that into account, even though they've tried to say before they won't. I mean, I think the DeWitt's kind of referenced it recently, and I believe Mo did in a recent interview too, where he kind of alluded to like, yeah, there's some uncertainty there. And it's like, well, we all kind of thought that was coming. But then also too, like I do think there's gonna like not just the TV, they're gonna be like, well, we had a down year attendance wise, and are we about to have even worse year next year attendance wise? Like that's gonna affect their bottom line. They're gonna care about it. So yes, I do think there's a lot of things they're gonna weigh, and it'll be interesting to see how they handle payroll and spending in general based off that. Again, I want them to spend more. I think fans should expect that from them, but I'm okay with, and I think the fan base should at least be somewhat okay with, or at least understand if they do scale back payroll for the sake of resetting the organization, investing in the infrastructure they need as an organization to get back to being one of the cutting edge organizations in baseball, and then getting back to spending once they figure that out. I don't mind that because, I mean, again, I think Bernie Miklasz has been someone who's really pumped this really well. It's like the Cardinals have just not spent their money well in general. The Brewers consistently spend far less than them and have been better than them. The Rays, the Guardians. There's a lot of teams around baseball right now that spend less than the Cardinals and are playing better. And so it's not necessarily about how much you spend; it's how you spend it. Now, obviously, once you start building a contender or once you start building a healthy organization, you should, especially an organization like St. Louis, should supplement it with payroll spending too. But I'm not like, so I'm not of the opinion that the Cardinals are going to fix their issues by spending $20 million more next year. Like it'd help if they spend it correctly, but it's not the main thing. The main thing, the big issues is organization-wide stuff that if they invest more in that because of the payroll decreases, I would understand that. So we'll see. But you can argue that they should do both. I get it, but I guess I'm just not totally there. So at least right now, like if that's for the sake of it. So 2 more questions today. The last big Cardinal related one that I'll get onto the Ohtani thing is, can you and Bernie, as in Bernie Miklasz, address Michael Girsch? Does this man have a specific role as the general manager in this organization? Doesn't seem to do whatever other general managers in MLB does. What does his paycheck go to? I mean, I get why people are like, what does Michael Girsch do? Right? Because it's like you don't really see him, and Mo's in his role and seems to do GM like things. How I've had it explained to me before, I'll say why it's structured like this first, and then maybe get into Girsch's role is. So you'll remember, I think it was 2017, 2018 range that John Mozeliak got promoted to president of baseball operations from general manager. The reason that happened was it's a different structure of a front office. Mo was being empowered to start thinking super high level about the organization and oversee all the things happening. And then other people like Michael Girsch, who's an assistant GM, Randy Flores, who's an assistant GM. I'm totally blanking on who the other assistant GM is right now. Gosh, I don't want to butcher his name, so I'm just going to look it up as we're doing this. I feel so bad. But he oversees international scouting and stuff like that as well. And so they kind of like own these certain areas and like are almost like representatives of those areas. And then Mo oversees them. Gary LaRocque, was also an assistant general manager. And then also Moises Rodriguez was an assistant general manager. And then there's other people in the front office too, right? Like, again, Bloom was in a special assistant or an advisor this year. Joe McEwing was in a special assistant. Matt Slater was in a special assistant. There's other people with different roles. And honestly, the Cardinals front office is kind of understaffed right now, if you can believe it or not. So when Mo rose to president of baseball operations, Girsch became vice president, general manager. Girsch's role, again, what's been explained to me is he kind of does the negotiating contracts, player transactions. He helps with baseball development, player transactions, contract negotiations, player evaluations, all that kind of stuff. Like, he's been credited a lot with like kind of doing some of the pre-work on contracts, and he's one of the guys that's like really helped. I think he's been credited a lot with enacting a lot of these club options on deals that have been really interesting to give Cardinals flexibility on the end of deals. I know he got a lot of credit for orchestrating the Jordan Montgomery trade with the Yankees at the time. So in a lot of ways, again, because baseball isn't just making trades and signing people, right? Like, it goes about like, how are you optimizing your analytics department? How are you optimizing player development? What is happening with how players are being treated in AA, single, or AAA? Your international stuff, your amateur scouting, and within the United States, your overseas scouting for like non-amateur international free agents, trades, again, coaching staff, major league player development, business. There's some business stuff that they think about too. There's a lot of different things. And so Mo kind of gets to live in all the worlds and kind of think big picture how it affects St. Louis Cardinals. And then there's people like Girsch, Flores, Rodriguez, LaRock before he retired, or is retiring though, who oversee these specific areas and are really like, that's my baby and that's what I oversee, but I report to Mo about it. So Girsch has a job. He does things, and but it's hard because it's like none of us are in the room. So like, you could say Girsch does nothing. I'm like, well, I guess I can't tell you he does because I'm not there, but I know his job title is. And I just, like, let's be honest for a second. If the DeWitts we think are cheap, which I don't think they're cheap, but I don't think they like to waste money, that's for sure. Why would they hire people that don't do anything? And I know the DeWitts are involved with baseball stuff. Like, I don't think they would just want a guy with a title and pay him money to do nothing. Like, I know it's easy to say people do nothing. And when things don't happen, it feels like people do nothing. But, and again, I'm not saying they do a lot of things. I'm not trying to defend them. But it's also hard because it's like, how do we know? Like, I'm trying to think of a good example from recent memory, but like, maybe there's been an offseason where you're like, why didn't they try to sign or trade for this specific starting pitcher? Why didn't they try to trade for Logan Gilbert? Let's throw it as an example. Maybe they did, but like nothing came to be. And maybe they're like, well, why did they pull it off? Well, what if the Mariners were asking for Mason Wynn and Jordan Walker? You're probably like, probably not doing that. And what the Cardinals like, hey, I'll trade you Lars Nootbaar, Nolan Gorman. And you might not even like that, but maybe the Cardinals offered it and the Mariners still said no. Or they could have never called the Mariners. We just don't know those things. And so that's where it gets really hard to evaluate some of the specifics of someone's job. Now, again, we look at the bottom line results, and that's what really matters. And so you evaluate based on that. But I just don't love the argument when people say like, oh, this person just doesn't do anything, when it's like, well, we don't see their job. And part of the reason we don't hear from Michael Girsch that often is that part of Mo's role is that he can be a unified voice for the front office. Like, he is the person that answers. He's like, at the end of the day, he answers for everything. And so it makes sense that he's the one communicating, rather than like we hear from Rodriguez sometimes, Flores sometimes, Girsch sometimes. And also, like, if we only heard from like Girsch and Flores this year, people would probably be like, where's Mo? Why won't he answer things? Now, he hasn't actually been that available this year, which is kind of frustrating, at least publicly. But again, that's just a thing. So I do understand why it's a question, though. Last thing, this is mostly from Andrew. Thoughts on Ohtani getting 50-50? Well, actually, he got 51-51 tonight because he went 6 for 6 with 10 RBIs, I think 2 stolen bases and 3 home runs. It might be the greatest single performance in baseball history. I would love to hear in the comments. So please comment your questions. Again, like the stream or like the Q&A if you enjoyed it. But let me know also, even if you're giving some questions as well, what you think of Ohtani's performance tonight. Or I guess if you're watching this Friday, last night, was it one of the best you've ever seen? Because in my opinion, it definitely is one of the best. And I think it might be the best. Again, the Fernando Tatis 2 grand slams in one inning, It's got to be up there. That's pretty impressive. Mark Whitten had 4 home runs and 12 RBIs in a game at one point. There's some other games I'm not really thinking of right now, but it's definitely one of the most impressive games of all time. Off the top of my head, I'm like, this might be the guy. Like, this might be the best game, especially with history on the line. Like, he was trying to get to 50-50. Oh, man, that's just super impressive. So, man, Shohei Ohtani is I wish baseball was cared about as much as it used to be in America right now, because he's probably the greatest baseball talent we've ever seen. I'm not saying he's the best baseball player we've ever seen yet. He needs more accomplishments than that, probably, but I don't know. I wouldn't fight you if you said Ohtani's the best baseball player ever. But man, this guy's incredible. What a treat it is to have Shohei Ohtani in baseball right now. So really appreciate the support. Again, like and subscribe on the way out. Comment any questions you have for next week's episode, and we'll see you next time on Deal on the Cards.